Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. The Great Hall of Casterly Rock had been transformed into a war council chamber, its ancient walls bearing witness to the methodical preparation for what would likely be the most significant conflict House Lannister had faced in decades. Tywin Lannister stood at the head of the massive oak table, his green eyes moving across the assembled commanders, with the calculating precision of a master evaluating his pieces before a crucial game. The news of the convoy attack had reached him 3 days ago, carried by one of the few survivors who had managed to escape the carnage on the King's Road. 50 wagons destroyed, 100 men dead or captured, months of careful planning reduced to ash and memory. It was exactly the kind of strike Jon Snow would orchestrate, precise, devastating, and designed to send a message that could not be ignored. "The boy has drawn first blood," Tywin said, his voice carrying across the hall with the authority of absolute command. "And he has done so with a competence that reflects his education." Around the table, his most trusted commanders shifted uncomfortably. Sir Tavin, Sir Dedham Marbrand, Sir Gregor Clegane, and a dozen others, men who had served House Lannister faithfully for years, who understood the brutal mathematics of warfare and the price of victory. But none of them had expected their first major setback to come from a bastard boy they had watched grow up in their own halls. "How do we respond, my lord?" asked Sir Adam, his weathered face grim in the torchlight. Tywin moved to the great map that dominated the eastern wall, his finger tracing the route where the convoy had been ambushed. The location had been chosen with surgical precision, far enough from major settlements to avoid witnesses, close enough to Stark territory to allow for rapid withdrawal, positioned on terrain that favored the attackers over the defenders. "We respond by acknowledging that we are no longer fighting the honorable fools who knelt to Robert Baratheon," he said. "Jon Snow has brought Lancer methods to the north, and that changes the nature of this conflict entirely." It was a bitter admission, but one that had to be made. For 15 years, Tywin had shaped Jon Snow into the perfect weapon, intelligent, ruthless, capable of thinking several moves ahead of his enemies. The irony that this weapon was now turned against him was not lost on the Lord of Casterly Rock. "What are your orders?" Septa Kevin asked. Tywin returned to his seat at the head of the table, his movements deliberate and controlled. Around him, 24 of the finest military minds in Westeros waited for his guidance, their loyalty absolute despite the challenging circumstances they faced. "We accelerate our timeline as well," he said. "Sir Adam, I want 5,000 more men moving north within the week, not to the Golden Tooth. That's what they expect. Instead, you'll take the river road, through the riverlands, moving fast and light." "To what end, my lord?" "To force Jon Snow to react to our movements rather than initiating his own." Tywin's smile was cold and predatory. "The boy is clever, but he's still young. He'll feel compelled to respond to a direct threat, and when he does, he'll reveal his positions and his capabilities." It was a classic Lannister strategy. Create a crisis that forced the enemy to act, then exploit the intelligence gained from their response. Jon would recognize the tactic, but his emotional attachment to his family would make it difficult for him to ignore a potential threat to Winterfell. "What of our other preparations?" asked Ser Devon, Lannister, Tywin's nephew and one of his most capable field commanders. "Proceed as planned. Ser Gregor, your men will continue to patrol the borders between the Westerlands and the Riverlands. I want every road, every path, every goat track under observation. If a sparrow flies north without my permission, I want to know about it." The mountain nodded his massive head, his presence at the table a reminder of the brutal methods House Lannister was prepared to employ. Gregor Clegane was a blunt instrument, but sometimes blunt instruments were exactly what a situation required. "My lord," said Maester Creel, the elderly scholar who served as Casterly Rock's keeper of ravens, "we've received responses to our diplomatic overtures. House Tyrell has confirmed their support, as have Houses Redwyne and Hightower. The Reach will stand with us." "Expected," Tywin replied. "What of Dorne?" "Prince Doran remains non-committal. He speaks of ancient grievances and the need for careful consideration." Tywin's jaw tightened slightly. Dornish neutrality was not unexpected, but it was still frustrating. The Martas had never forgiven the deaths of Elia and her children during Robert's rebellion, and their hatred of House Lannister ran deeper than political expedience. Continue the negotiations, but don't expect miracles. The Dornish will join whichever side they believe will allow them the best opportunity for revenge against us. And the Vale? Sir Kevin asked. Lysa Arryn is mad, but she's not stupid. She'll keep the Vale out of this conflict, unless directly threatened. Tywin's expression was thoughtful, which gives us an opportunity. If we can secure the Riverlands quickly enough, we can isolate the North from any potential southern allies. The strategy was taking shape. A multi-pronged approach designed to exploit the geographic advantages of the Lannister position, while neutralizing the tactical innovations Jon Snow had introduced. It would require careful timing and flawless execution, but Tywin had built his reputation on exactly such challenges. There's another matter we must address, he continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. Jon Snow's knowledge of our family, our methods, our weaknesses. He knows things that could be devastating if used against us. The assembled commanders exchanged glances. They all understood the implications. Jon had been present for countless private conversations, had observed family dynamics and political maneuvering, had been trusted with information that was never meant to be shared with enemies. What do you propose? Settlin asked carefully. We ensure that his knowledge becomes irrelevant. Tywin replied. Information is only valuable if the person possessing it is alive to use it. Our goal is not simply to defeat the Stark rebellion, it's to eliminate everyone who poses a threat to our family's security. The words were spoken with the casual certainty of a man discussing crop yields, but everyone in the room understood their true meaning. This would not be a war of conquest or political maneuvering, it would be a war of extermination. My lord, Maester Craylan said hesitantly, such a course of action might provoke responses from the other great houses. They may view it as excessive. They will view it as necessary, Tywin interrupted. When this is over, every family in Westeros will understand the price of defying House Lannister. That understanding will serve us well for generations to come. It was a cold calculation, but one rooted in decades of experience. Fear was often more effective than love or loyalty, and the complete destruction of House Stark would send a message that no other family would dare to ignore. What of Tyrion? Ser Tywin asked quietly. It has always been a concern that he has always been fond of the boy. Tywin's expression hardened at the mention of his youngest son. Tyrion's unpredictable nature and emotional attachments made him a potential complication in the coming conflict. Do as I ordered before. Tyrion will be kept at Casterly Rock for the duration of the campaign, he decided. And if he objects, then he will be reminded that family loyalty sometimes requires personal sacrifice. Tywin's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I will not allow sentiment to undermine our strategic objectives. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of troop movements, supply lines, and contingency plans. But as his commanders filed out to begin implementing their orders, Tywin remained alone in the Great Hall, surrounded by maps and plans and the weight of decisions that would reshape the Seven Kingdoms. He moved to the window that looked out over the sunset sea, his mind turning to the broader implications of the conflict ahead. House Lannister had survived and prospered for centuries through a combination of wealth, cunning, and ruthless pragmatism. They had weathered rebellions, invasions, and internal strife by adapting to changing circumstances, while never losing sight of their ultimate goals. But this was different. This was personal. Jon Snow was not simply another rebellious lord seeking to advance his position. He was Tywin's own creation, shaped and molded by 15 years of careful instruction, turned against his teachers by bonds of blood and emotion that Tywin had never fully understood. The boy represented everything House Lannister had achieved in terms of education and strategic thinking, but applied in service of their enemies. It was perhaps the greatest irony of Tywin's long career. His most successful student was now his most dangerous opponent. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called, and was surprised to see Cersei step into the hall. His daughter looked magnificent in a gown of deep crimson silk, her golden hair arranged in an elaborate style that emphasized her beauty and authority. But Tywin could see the tension in her green eyes, the barely controlled anger that had been building since news of Jon's betrayal had reached King's Landing. Father, she said, her voice carefully modulated but carrying an undercurrent of fury. I trust you have a plan to deal with our ungrateful ward. I have several plans, Tywin replied coolly. The question is which one will prove most effective. Cersei moved to join him at the window, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. In early days, he was like a son to me, even if I had to sacrifice that love for family, she said quietly. At that time I raised him, protected him, gave him every advantage our family could provide, and this is how he repays that kindness. Sentiment has no place in warfare, Tywin said firmly. Jon Snow made his choice when he remained at Winterfell. The consequences of that choice are not our responsibility. But they are our opportunity, Cersei replied, her voice hardening. The boy knows our secrets, our methods, our weaknesses, but he also has weaknesses of his own. His attachment to his family, his need to be seen as honorable, his emotional nature. Tywin turned to study his daughter more carefully. Despite her many flaws, Cersei possessed a keen understanding of human nature and the ways in which emotional attachments could be exploited. "What do you propose?" he asked. "We make this personal," she said, her smile cold and calculating. "Jon Snow wants to play the Game of Thrones using our methods? Then we show him what those methods truly mean when applied without restraint." The suggestion was intriguing, but Tywin could see the potential complications. Cersei's emotional investment in the conflict could lead to strategic errors, and her tendency toward cruelty might provoke responses that would complicate their broader objectives. "Elaborate," he said. "The Starks pride themselves on their honor, their loyalty to family, their protection of the innocent. We attack those values directly, not just through military action, but through psychological warfare. We make Jon Snow choose between his strategic objectives and his emotional attachments, and we ensure that every choice he makes costs him something precious." It was a sophisticated approach, one that demonstrated Cersei's growth as a political operator. The strategy of forcing enemies to choose between competing loyalties was a classic Lancer tactic, and one that had served them well in previous conflicts. "The risks?" Tywin asked. "Minimal, if executed properly. The key is to maintain plausible deniability, while ensuring that Jon Snow understands exactly who is responsible for his suffering." Tywin considered the proposal carefully. It had merit, but it also required a level of subtlety and restraint that Cersei had not always demonstrated in the past. "Very well," he said finally, "but you will coordinate your efforts with our overall strategy. Personal vengeance must serve political objectives, not the reverse." Cersei's smile was triumphant. "Of course, father. Everything I do will be in service of our family's interests." As she left the hall, Tywin returned his attention to the maps and plans spread across the great table. The pieces were moving into position for what would likely be the most significant conflict of his lifetime. Jon Snow had struck the first blow, but the war was far from over. House Lannister had faced challenges before, rebellions, invasions, internal strife, and had emerged stronger each time. They had done so through a combination of superior resources, strategic thinking, and absolute ruthlessness in pursuit of their objectives. This time would be no different. The lion was preparing to strike, and when it did, the North would learn that some lessons could only be taught through complete and utter destruction. The war room at Winterfell had taken on the atmosphere of a master's study, its ancient stone walls now covered with detailed maps, intersected correspondence, and intelligence reports that painted a comprehensive picture of Lannister movements across the Seven Kingdoms. Jon Snow stood at the center of it all, his gray eyes moving between the various pieces of information, with the calculating precision that 15 years at Casterly Rock had ingrained in him. "They're moving faster than expected," he said, pointing to a series of red markers on the great map that dominated the eastern wall. "Cerridon Marbrand's force left the Golden Tooth 3 days ago, but they're not taking the direct route. They're moving through the Riverlands instead." Robb leaned forward from his position across the table, his blue eyes studying the marked positions with growing concern. "That's a longer route. Why would they?" He stopped, understanding dawning on his face. "They're trying to force us to react." Exactly. Jon's smile was cold and appreciative. It was a classic Tywin Lannister maneuver. Create a threat that demanded response, then exploit the intelligence gained from that response. "Father taught me this tactic when I was 12. Create a crisis, force your enemy to reveal their capabilities, then adapt your strategy accordingly." The assembled war council, composed of northern lords, trusted knights, and the core Stark family, listened with the focused attention of students receiving instruction from a master. It was still strange for many of them to see Ned Stark's bastard son commanding such authority, but Jon's recent successes had earned him their respect and trust. "So we don't react," said Sir Roderick Castle, his weathered face grim in the torchlight. "We let them march through the Riverlands unopposed." "No," Jon replied, moving to a different section of the map. "We give them exactly the reaction they expect, but not in the way they expect it." He traced a route with his finger, following the path from Winterfell south toward the Neck. "They want us to move forces to counter their advance. So we will, but not our real forces. We'll give them shadows and phantoms, decoys designed to make them believe they're facing our main strength." Arya, who had been quietly observing from her position near the window, spoke up with the directness that had always characterized her. "What kind of decoys?" She has been personally trained by Jon in these matters. These days, even though Catelyn did not approve of it, but she could not reject this either, because in the time of war, even women should know how to protect themselves, especially after that ladder from Red Keep came. Jon's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the question. His little sister had grown considerably during his absence, and her sharp intelligence made her a valuable contributor to their strategic discussions. Banners mostly. Small groups of men carrying the standards of major northern houses, moving in patterns designed to suggest larger forces. Campfires lit in formations that imply significant troop concentrations. Messengers carrying false orders that we know will be intercepted. "And while they're chasing shadows," Robb asked, "we strike where they least expect it." Jon moved to another map, this one showing the western approaches to the north. "Now Tywin will keep his main force at Casterly Rock until he's certain of our dispositions, but he'll have supply lines, communication networks, smaller garrisons that he considers secure." The strategy was taking shape in Jon's mind as he spoke, each element building on the others in a complex web of deception and misdirection. It was the kind of multi-layered approach that Tywin himself might have devised, but adapted to the unique advantages the North possessed. "Maester Luwin," Jon said, turning to the elderly scholar who served as Winterfell's Keeper of Ravens. "What's our intelligence on Lannister positions in the western Riverlands?" The Maester consulted his notes, with the careful precision of a lifetime spent managing information. "3 major supply depots, my lord. 1 at River Run, though that's heavily defended, and 2 smaller ones at Pink Maiden and Acorn Hall. The latter 2 are more vulnerable." "Perfect." Jon's smile was predatory. "We'll hit both simultaneously, using the same tactics that worked on the convoy. Fast strikes, maximum damage, immediate withdrawal. That will require splitting our forces," Sir Roderick observed. "Are we strong enough for multiple operations?" It was a valid concern, and one that highlighted the fundamental challenge they faced. The North was vast and sparsely populated, capable of fielding significant forces, but not easily concentrating them for sustained campaigns. Their strength lay in mobility and local knowledge, not in the kind of massive armies that the southern kingdoms could deploy. "We don't need to be stronger," Jon replied. "We need to be smarter. Each strike force will be small, 50 men at most, but they'll be our best. Men who know the terrain, who can move fast and strike hard." He turned to address the assembled lords directly, his voice carrying the authority that came from both breeding and training. "This isn't about conquest or glory, it's about survival. The Lannisters have more men, more gold, more resources, but they don't have our advantage's knowledge of the terrain, local support, and the element of surprise." Lord Umber, whose massive frame dominated one corner of the room, spoke up with the blunt directness that characterized his house. "And if these raids fail, if we lose men we can't afford to lose, then we adapt," Jon said simply. "That's what intelligence warfare requires. Constant adaptation, constant learning, constant evolution of tactics, based on changing circumstances." It was a lesson he had learned from countless hours spent studying with Tyrion, analyzing historical campaigns and theoretical strategies. The key to victory was not rigid adherence to predetermined plans, but the ability to respond creatively to unexpected developments. "There's another element we need to consider," said Lady Mormont, her voice cutting through the discussion with characteristic sharpness. "The political implications of our actions. Every move we make sends a message to the other great houses." Jon nodded appreciatively. Lyanna Mormont was young, but she possessed the kind of strategic thinking that made her invaluable in their current situation. "Which is exactly why we need to be careful about the messages we send," he replied. "We're not rebels seeking to overthrow the established order. We're defenders protecting our homeland from unprovoked aggression." And how do we ensure that message is received correctly? Asked Lord Manderley. By choosing our targets carefully, military supplies, not civilian populations. Lannister forces, not neutral parties. We demonstrate that our quarrel is with House Lannister specifically, not with the crown or the realm in general. The distinction was crucial, Jon knew. The moment they were perceived as rebels against royal authority, they would lose any hope of support from neutral houses. But if they could maintain the narrative of defensive action against Lannister aggression, they might be able to isolate their enemies politically as well as militarily. What of our allies? Robb asked. The Riverlands, the Vale? The Riverlands are complicated, Jon admitted. The Tullahs have marriage ties to both sides of this conflict. They'll likely remain neutral unless directly threatened. And the Vale, Lysa Arryn, is unpredictable, but the Vale has always been isolationist. They'll stay out of this unless they see a clear advantage in intervention. It was a sobering assessment, but an honest one. The North would likely face House Lannister alone, at least initially, but that had always been the reality of their situation. The North was too far from the centers of Southern power to rely on external support. Then we make our own advantages, said Arya, her voice carrying a determination that reminded Jon of their father. We use what we have, and we make it enough. Jon smiled at his sister's words. She had captured the essence of their situation perfectly. They would succeed or fail based on their own capabilities, their own intelligence, their own determination to protect what mattered most to them. Exactly, he said, and what we have is significant if we use it properly. He moved back to the central map, his finger tracing the boundaries of the North. We have the largest kingdom in Westeros, with terrain that favors defenders over invaders. We have a population that's loyal to House Stark, willing to provide intelligence and support. We have leaders who understand both conventional warfare and unconventional tactics. And we have you, Robb said quietly. Someone who knows how the Lannisters think, how they plan, how they fight. The words carried weight that went beyond simple tactical considerations. Jon's unique background, raised by the Lannisters but loyal to the Starks, gave him insights that no other northern leader could possess. He understood Tywin's methods, Cersei's psychology, the internal dynamics that drove Lannister decision-making. That knowledge cuts both ways, Jon replied honestly. They know me as well as I know them. They understand my training, my capabilities, my likely responses to their actions. But they don't know everything, said Catelyn, speaking for the first time since the meeting had begun. Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the authority of a woman who had spent decades managing the complex politics of great house leadership. They know the boy they raised, but they don't know the man you've become since returning to Winterfell. The observation was perceptive, and it highlighted something Jon had been thinking about increasingly in recent days. His time at Casterly Rock had shaped him profoundly, but his return to the North had also changed him in ways that the Lannisters couldn't fully anticipate. She's right, he said, feeling a surge of gratitude toward the woman who had chosen to accept him as a son, despite the complicated circumstances of his birth. I don't know, but maybe they expect me to think like a Lannister, to prioritize individual advancement over family loyalty, or even like a Stark, but I am not among both categories. That's not who I am anymore. Who are you? Asked Sansa, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Jon considered the question carefully. It was something he had been struggling with since learning the truth of his parentage, since choosing to remain at Winterfell despite Cersei's demands, since taking on the responsibility of protecting his family from the consequences of that choice. I'm a Stark, he said finally. Not only by blood, but also by choice, by loyalty, by the bonds that matter more than genetics or politics, or the games that great houses play for power and position. But I am also someone who thinks like a Lannister, as they raised me so. The words felt right as he spoke them, carrying a certainty that had been building within him for weeks. His identity was not defined by the circumstances of his birth or the family that had raised him, but by the choices he made and the people he chose to protect. Then we fight as Starks, Robb said, his voice carrying the formal authority of the heir to Winterfell. We protect our people, we defend our homeland, and we show the Seven Kingdoms that the North remembers. The ancient words of their house carried special meaning in their current situation. The North remembered loyalty, honor, the bonds between lord and vassal that had sustained them through centuries of hardship, but they also remembered the price of those bonds, the sacrifices required to maintain them. The raids begin tomorrow, Jon decided. 2 strike forces moving simultaneously against the supply depots at Pink Maiden and Acorn Hall. Fast in, maximum damage, fast out. Who leads them? Asked Sir Roderick. I'll take Pink Maiden, Jon said. It's the larger target, more heavily defended. Robb, you take Acorn Hall with a smaller force. Jon, Robb began, but his brother cut him off with a raised hand. This isn't about glory or proving anything, Jon said firmly. It's about using our resources most effectively. I have the experience with this kind of operation, and Pink Maiden requires that experience. It was a pragmatic decision, but one that carried emotional weight as well. Jon felt the responsibility for their family's safety keenly, and he was not willing to delegate the most dangerous missions to others when he could handle them himself. What about the decoy operations? Asked Lord Umber. Ser Roderick will coordinate those from Winterfell. Multiple small forces moving south with appropriate banners and signals, designed to convince Lannister scouts that we're deploying our main strength to counter Ser Autumn's advance. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and coordination between multiple elements, but it was also flexible, capable of adaptation if circumstances changed or unexpected opportunities arose. And if the Lannisters see through our deceptions? Asked Lady Mormont. Then we adapt, Jon replied, but they won't. At least not immediately. They're expecting us to react conventionally, to meet their advance with our own. They're not prepared for the kind of asymmetric warfare we're planning. It was a calculated risk, based on Jon's understanding of Lannister psychology and tactical preferences. Tywin was a master of conventional warfare, but he had always relied on superior resources and straightforward applications of force. The kind of complex deception Jon was planning was outside his normal operational patterns. How long do we have before they realize what we're doing? Robb asked. Days, maybe a week, Jon estimated. Long enough to complete the initial raids and assess their effectiveness. After that, we'll need to evolve our tactics based on their responses. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of logistics, communication protocols, and contingency plans. But as the assembled lords and commanders filed out to begin implementing their orders, Jon remained in the war room with his immediate family, Robb, Arya, Sansa, and Catelyn. Are you certain about this? Catelyn asked, her voice carrying the concern of a mother for her children. The risks are enormous, and the consequences of failure. The consequences of inaction are worse, Jon replied. The Lannisters won't stop with a single convoy raid. They'll escalate until they achieve their objectives, which include the complete destruction of House Stark. It was a harsh assessment, but one based on 15 years of observation and instruction. Tywin Lannister did not forgive perceived slights, and he did not leave potential threats alive to challenge him in the future. Then we make sure we don't fail, Arya said, her voice carrying the fierce determination that had always characterized her. We're Starks. We protect each other. Jon smiled at his sister's words, feeling a surge of affection and pride. Despite everything they had faced, despite the dangers ahead, his family remained united in their determination to survive and protect what mattered most to them. We are, he agreed. And tomorrow, we show the Lannisters what that means. As his family dispersed to make their own preparations, Jon remained alone in the war room, surrounded by maps and plans and the weight of decisions that would determine their fate. The battle of wits had begun, and the next moves would reveal whether his Lannister education could be successfully turned against his former teachers. The pre-dawn mist clung to the hills surrounding Casterly Rock like a shroud, and Tywin Lannister stood upon the battlements of his ancestral seat, watching the organized chaos of an army preparing for war. Below him, tens of thousands of men moved with the disciplined precision that had made House Lannister the most feared military force in the Seven Kingdoms. My lord, came the voice of Ser Kevan Lannister from behind him. The scouts have returned from the Riverlands. Tywin turned, his green eyes sharp with interest. And Stark forces are moving south, just as we anticipated. Multiple columns bearing the banners of the major northern houses. Umber, Mormont, Karstark, they appear to be converging on the twins. It was exactly the response Tywin had expected, and yet something about the report troubled him. The movement was too obvious, too conventional for someone who had been raised in the halls of Casterly Rock. Numbers, he asked. The scouts estimate at least 5,000 men, possibly more. The formation suggests they're taking this threat seriously. Tywin nodded slowly, his mind working through the implications. 5,000 men represented a significant portion of the North's available forces, more than he had expected Jon to commit to a single operation. "What of our other intelligence sources?" he asked. Ep11 consulted his leather portfolio, his expression growing troubled. "We're receiving conflicting reports. Some sources confirm significant northern troop movements. Others suggest the forces are smaller than they appear. There are reports of Jon Snow himself leading one of the columns, but also reports placing him at Winterfell as recently as yesterday." The inconsistencies were telling, and Tywin felt a familiar mixture of pride and frustration as he recognized the pattern. It was a classic misdirection campaign, the kind of sophisticated deception that required careful coordination and intimate knowledge of intelligence networks. "My guess is that he's playing games," Ty said, though there was no anger in his voice, only the cold appreciation of a master recognizing the work of a skilled student. "The question is, what's the real objective while we're focused on these phantom armies? You think the northern movements are a feint?" "I think," Tywin said carefully, "that years of education have not been wasted on the boy. He knows how we gather intelligence, how we analyze threats, how we deploy our forces in response to perceived dangers." It was a sobering realization, one that highlighted the unique nature of their current conflict. Jon Snow was different. He had been trained by the same masters, educated in the same methods, exposed to the same strategic principles that Tywin himself employed. "What do you recommend?" Sarah Kevin asked. Tywin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the army assembled below. The sight of so much disciplined power was reassuring, but he knew that raw force alone would not be sufficient against an enemy who understood how to turn strength into weakness. "We proceed as planned," he decided, "but we remain flexible. If this is indeed a deception, the real attack will come where we least expect it, and it will come soon. Gentlemen," Tywin began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "We stand at a crossroads. The choices we make in the coming days will determine not only the fate of this conflict, but the future of House Lannister itself." He rose from his chair and moved to the great map that dominated the eastern wall, his finger tracing the routes that connected their various forces and objectives. "Our enemy is not the conventional northern army that some of you may have expected. Jon Snow has been educated in our methods, trained in our strategies, exposed to our strengths and weaknesses. He knows how we think, how we plan, how we respond to threats." The admission was difficult, but necessary. His commanders needed to understand the nature of their opponent, if they were to have any hope of victory. "But," Tywin continued, his voice hardening, "knowledge is not wisdom, training is not experience. And most importantly, understanding our methods does not make him our equal." He turned to face the assembled commanders directly, his green eyes moving from face to face with the intensity that had made him one of the most feared men in Westeros. "Jon Snow has advantages. Terrain, local support, the element of surprise. But we have advantages as well. Superior numbers, better equipment, more experienced commanders, and the discipline that comes from years of successful campaigns." "What of the reports from the Riverlands?" asked Ser Adam Marbrand. "The northern forces moving to intercept my advance?" "A feint," Tywin said with certainty, "designed to draw our attention and resources away from his real objective. The boy is clever, but not clever enough to completely mask his intentions." "Then what is his real objective?" asked Ser Stafford Lannister. It was the crucial question, and one that Tywin had been considering since the first reports had arrived. Jon's strategy would be based on achieving maximum impact with minimum resources, a classic asymmetric approach. "Supply lines," Tywin said after a moment's consideration. "In my views, he'll most likely strike at our logistics, our communication networks, the infrastructure that supports our military operations. It's what I would do in his position." The assessment was based on both strategic logic and personal knowledge. Jon had always shown a preference for indirect approaches, for solutions that achieved objectives through intelligence rather than brute force. "Which targets?" asked Ser Kevin. Tywin moved to a different map, one showing the supply routes that connected Casterly Rock to their forward positions. "I really don't know for sure which ones exactly. Should we reinforce them?" asked Ser Adam. "No," Tywin replied immediately. "That would confirm our awareness of the threat and potentially disrupt his plans. Better to let him proceed, but be ready to respond when he reveals himself." Reinforcing all points will exhaust most of our recourses and divide our forces. So be ready at all important points. It was a calculated risk, one that would cost them supplies and possibly men. But it would also provide valuable intelligence about Jon's capabilities and methods, information that would be crucial for the larger conflict ahead. The strategy was deliberately conservative, designed to avoid the kind of overcommitment that could be exploited by a clever enemy. Tywin had learned long ago that patience was often more valuable than aggression, especially when facing an opponent who understood conventional tactical responses. The briefing continued with detailed discussions of troop dispositions and communication protocols. But as his commanders dispersed, Tywin remained in the Great Hall, alone with his thoughts and the weight of decisions that would determine the fate of his house. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. For 15 years he had invested time, resources, and genuine affection in raising Jon Snow as if he were a true son of House Lannister. And now, that investment was being turned against him with a skill and precision that he could not help but admire. "You taught him well," came a voice from the shadows. Tyrion Lannister emerged from an alcove, his mismatched eyes reflecting the firelight. "Too well, perhaps," Tywin replied without turning. "Do you regret it?" Tyrion asked. "The years spent educating your most dangerous enemy?" It was a question that Tywin had been asking himself repeatedly since the conflict began. The rational answer was obvious, but the emotional reality was more complex. "No," he said finally. "I regret that it was necessary, but not the choice itself. Jon Snow is exceptional. It would have been a waste to leave such potential undeveloped, even knowing it would eventually be used against us. I hoped it wouldn't come to this," Tywin admitted. "I believed that 15 years of shared experiences would create bonds stronger than political considerations. But you were wrong." "I was wrong about the nature of those bonds," Tywin corrected. "They exist, I'm certain of that, but they're not stronger than his loyalty to House Stark." It was a painful acknowledgement, but an honest one. Jon's choice to remain at Winterfell had demonstrated where his ultimate loyalties lay, and Tywin respected that choice even as he prepared to destroy the boy who had made it. The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness, each messenger's arrival bringing the possibility of crucial intelligence. Tywin remained in the Great Hall, coordinating movements, while trying to anticipate his enemy's next move. As the sun reached its zenith, the pattern of reports began to shift. The northern forces at the Twins were taking longer than expected to complete their crossing. Most tellingly, there were no confirmed reports of Jon Snow himself among the forces moving south. "He's not with them," Tywin concluded. "The northern army is real enough, but their leadership is elsewhere." "Where?" asked Tyrion. "Preparing to strike where we're not looking." His words were interrupted by the arrival of a messenger bearing signs of hard riding. The man's face was grim as he approached and knelt before Tywin. "My lord," the messenger said, his voice hoarse. "I bring word from Pink Maiden. The supply depot has been attacked." The words fell into the great hall like stones into still water. Tywin felt a familiar mixture of vindication and frustration. He had predicted the attack, but prediction was not prevention. "Details," he commanded. 50 men, maybe fewer. They struck just before dawn, using the morning mist for concealment. The garrison was overwhelmed before they could mount an effective defense. The attackers destroyed the supplies and withdrew before reinforcements could arrive. "Casualties. 23 dead, my lord. Twice that number wounded. The depot itself is a total loss. Grain stores burned, weapons scattered, the buildings damaged beyond repair." It was a devastating blow, both tactically and psychologically. The depot at Pink Maiden had been a crucial link in their supply chain, and its loss would force significant adjustments to their strategic planning. "What of the attackers?" Tywin asked. "Any intelligence about their identity?" The survivors report that the attack was led by a young man with dark hair and gray eyes, someone who seemed to know the layout of the depot and the disposition of the guards. Jon Snow. The description matched perfectly, and the tactical sophistication confirmed what Tywin had suspected. The boy had not only planned the operation, but led it personally. "And Icorn Hall?" Tywin asked, though he already suspected the answer. The messenger's expression grew grimmer. "A second rider arrived just as I was departing, my lord. Acorn Hall was attacked simultaneously. Similar tactics, similar results. The supply network in the western Riverlands has been effectively severed. The scope of the coordinated assault was impressive, requiring precise timing and excellent intelligence about Lannister positions. It was exactly the kind of operation that Tywin himself might have planned. Maximum impact with minimum resources. Estimated time for repairs and resupply, he asked. Weeks, my lord. Possibly months for full restoration. It was an unacceptable delay, one that would force significant modifications to their overall strategy. But it was also an opportunity. Jon had revealed his location and methods, providing valuable intelligence for future operations. Sir Kevin, Tywin called. Dispatch fast riders to all our remaining supply depots. I want the garrisons reinforced immediately. Yes, my lord. And send word to Suradabim. The northern forces at the Twins are likely a deception. He should be prepared to disengage based on new intelligence. As his orders were implemented, Tywin found himself experiencing complex emotions. The attacks had been successful, demonstrating that Jon possessed both strategic intelligence and tactical skill. It was a source of pride. The boy he had raised was proving worthy of that investment. But it was also deeply concerning. If Jon could orchestrate such sophisticated operations with limited resources, what might he accomplish with the full support of the North? The conflict that Tywin had initially viewed as manageable was revealing itself to be far more dangerous. Impressive, Tyrion observed. Coordinated strikes, excellent intelligence, precise execution. You taught him very well indeed. Well enough to be dangerous, Tywin agreed, but not well enough to win. This was a successful opening move, but it's only the beginning. What's our response? Tyrion was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through the implications and available options. Jon had demonstrated his capabilities, but he had also revealed his methods and limitations. We adapt, he said finally. We acknowledge that our enemy is more capable than initially anticipated, and we adjust our strategy accordingly. Meaning that we stop treating this as a minor rebellion to be quickly suppressed, and start treating it as a serious war against a formidable opponent. The admission was difficult, but necessary. Tywin's initial approach had been based on the assumption that northern resistance would be conventional, easily overcome through superior force. But Jon's actions had demonstrated that the conflict would require more sophisticated methods. The boy has won the first round, Tywin continued. But there will be others, and we have advantages that he cannot match indefinitely. Such as numbers, resources, experience, and most importantly, the ability to sustain a prolonged conflict. Jon's tactics are impressive, but they're also resource-intensive. He can't maintain this level of operations indefinitely. It was a sound assessment based on decades of military experience and knowledge of logistical challenges. But even as Tywin spoke, he felt uncertainty about their accuracy. Jon Snow was no longer the boy who had left Casterly Rock. He had returned to his roots, reconnected with his family, found sources of strength that went beyond tactical considerations. The question was whether those factors would overcome the material disadvantages he faced. So we prepare for a longer war, Tyrion observed. We prepare for whatever war is necessary, Tywin corrected. And we ensure that House Lannister emerges victorious, regardless of the cost. The words carried absolute determination, the kind of resolve that had made Tywin Lannister one of the most feared men in Westeros. But they also carried an undertone of sadness, an acknowledgement that victory would require destroying something precious. As the sun set over Casterly Rock, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the Lannister colors, Tywin stood once again upon the battlements. Below him, the army continued its preparations, but his thoughts were focused on a different kind of battlefield. The clash of houses had begun in earnest, and the outcome would determine not only the fate of the participants, but the future of the realm itself. Jon Snow had proven himself a worthy opponent, but Tywin Lannister had not built his reputation by accepting defeat. The game was far from over, and the next moves would reveal whether experience and resources could triumph over youth and determination. But whatever the outcome, Tyrion knew that neither side would emerge unchanged from the conflict ahead. The war room at Winterfell buzzed with the controlled energy of an army preparing for decisive action. Jon Snow stood before the great table, studying the detailed map that showed the positions of both Stark and Lannister forces across the Riverlands. The successful raids on Pink Maiden and Acorn Hall had given them momentum, but he knew that Tywin would not remain passive for long. The supply disruptions have forced them to consolidate, Jon explained to the assembled commanders, his finger tracing the enemy positions marked in red. Tywin's pulled back his forward elements and is concentrating his forces around more defensible positions. Robb leaned forward from his position across the table, his blue eyes bright with the confidence that their recent victories had instilled. Which gives us the opportunity we've been waiting for. A chance to engage them on terms more favorable to us. The plan they had developed was ambitious, but achievable, with House Karstark's forces providing the northern flank and the combined Stark-Umber contingent holding the center. They could potentially trap a significant portion of the Lannister army in the valley, approaches to the Golden Tooth. It would be their largest engagement yet, and success could shift the entire balance of the conflict. Lord Karstark's men are in position, Jon asked, turning to Maester Lowen, who managed their communications. Yes, my lord. Lord Rickard sent word yesterday that his forces have reached the designated coordinates and are awaiting the signal to advance. Jon nodded, feeling a surge of satisfaction. The Karstarks had been among their most reliable allies, their loyalty to House Stark stretching back generations. Rickard Karstark was a seasoned commander whose tactical expertise would be crucial in the coming battle. What of our intelligence on Lannister dispositions? Asked Arya, from her position near the window. His sister had become an invaluable part of their planning process, her sharp mind often catching details that others missed. Ser Adam Marbrand commands their main force, approximately 3,000 men, well-equipped and disciplined. They're positioned defensively, but they'll have to move if we threaten their supply lines effectively. And Tywin himself? Robb inquired. Still at Casterly Rock, as far as we know, but that could change quickly if he perceives a significant threat to his forward positions. The discussion continued for another hour, with detailed examination of timing, coordination signals, and contingency plans. Jon felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety that preceded major operations. Everything depended on precise execution and the reliability of their allies. There's something else we need to discuss, said Lady Mormont, her voice cutting through the tactical planning with characteristic directness. The political implications of this engagement. Jon looked up from the map, recognizing the importance of her point. Military success meant nothing if it came at the cost of political isolation. Explain. If we achieve a significant victory against Lannister forces, it will be seen throughout the Seven Kingdoms as open rebellion against the crown. There will be no possibility of negotiated settlement after that. It was a sobering reminder of the stakes involved. Up to this point, their actions could potentially be characterized as defensive responses to Lancer aggression. But a major battlefield victory would cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Lady Mormont conceded, but inevitability and wisdom are not always the same thing. What would you have us do? Robb asked, his voice carrying a slight edge. Surrender? Accept whatever terms the Lannisters choose to impose? I would have us be certain that we're prepared for the consequences of our choices, she replied calmly. Victory tomorrow means war until one side or the other is completely defeated. There will be no middle ground. The weight of her words settled over the room like a shroud. Jon understood the truth of what she was saying. They were about to commit themselves to a path that would end either in triumph or destruction, with no possibility of compromise. Then we make sure we win, he said simply. Completely and decisively. The meeting dispersed with final confirmations of timing and coordination. As the commanders filed out to make their preparations, Jon remained in the war room with his immediate family. The maps and plans surrounded them, but the conversation that followed was more personal. Are you certain about this? Catelyn asked, her voice carrying the concern of a mother watching her children prepare for battle. The risks are enormous. The risks of inaction are greater, Jon replied. Tywin won't stop until House Stark is destroyed. Our only choice is to strike first, and strike hard. And if we lose? Sansa asked quietly. Jon met his sister's eyes, seeing the fear there, but also the determination that had sustained their family through months of crisis. Then we lose fighting for what matters most to us. There are worse fates. Such as living as prisoners in our own home, watching everything our father built be systematically destroyed. It was a harsh assessment, but an honest one. The Lannisters did not forgive perceived slights, and they did not leave potential threats alive to challenge them in the future. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger bearing the colors of House Karstark. The young man's face was flushed from hard riding, and his expression carried an urgency that immediately put Jon on alert. "My lord," the messenger said, kneeling before Jon, "I bring word from Lord Rickard Karstark. Fake. My lord regrets that he cannot proceed with the planned operation. Circumstances have arisen that require the immediate withdrawal of Karstark forces to defend our own lands." The words fell into the war room like a physical blow. Jon felt the blood drain from his face as the implications became clear. Without the Karstark forces, their entire battle plan would have to be reconsidered, and time was running out. "What circumstances?" Robb demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Reports of wilding raids beyond the wall, my lord. Lord Rickard feels that his primary duty is to protect Harald and the surrounding settlements." Jon's mind raced through the possibilities. Wilding raids were not uncommon, but the timing was suspiciously convenient. Either this was an extraordinary coincidence, or something else was happening. "When did these raids begin?" he asked. 3 days ago, my lord. Lord Rickard received word yesterday and made the decision to withdraw immediately. And he couldn't send word earlier. Couldn't discuss alternatives. The messenger's discomfort was obvious. "My lord said that the safety of his people must come first, and that House Stark would understand the necessity of protecting one's own lands." It was a reasonable explanation on the surface, but Jon's instincts told him there was more to the story. The timing was too perfect, the decision too abrupt for a lord who had been enthusiastically supporting their cause for months. "Very well," Jon said finally. "Tell Lord Karstark that House Stark understands his position and wishes him success in defending his lands." The messenger departed with obvious relief, leaving the Stark family to confront the implications of this unexpected development. "We can't proceed with the original plan," Robb said immediately. "Without the Karstark forces, we don't have the numbers to execute the flanking maneuver." "We could delay," suggested Patton. "Wait for other allies to arrive, or for circumstances to change." "No," Jon replied, his voice hard with determination. "Delay gives Tywin time to reinforce his positions and potentially discover our intentions. We proceed, but with modified objectives." "Such as?" Jon turned back to the map, his mind already working through alternatives. The loss of the Karstark forces was a severe blow, but it wasn't necessarily fatal to their overall strategy. "We can't trap Sir Adam's entire force, but we can still inflict significant damage. A fighting withdrawal that costs them heavily while preserving our own strength." "That's a much riskier proposition," Arya observed. "Fighting withdrawals require perfect timing and discipline." "Which our men have," Jon replied. "They've proven that in every engagement so far." But even as he spoke the words, Jon felt the weight of uncertainty. The Karstark withdrawal had shaken his confidence in ways that went beyond mere tactical considerations. If their most reliable allies could abandon them at the crucial moment, what did that say about the strength of their cause? The modified battle plan took shape over the next several hours. Instead of a decisive engagement designed to destroy enemy forces, they would conduct a series of coordinated attacks designed to inflict maximum casualties while avoiding decisive combat. It was a more conservative approach, but one that better matched their reduced capabilities. "The men need to know about the Karstark withdrawal," Robb said as they finalized the details. "They'll hear about it anyway, and it's better coming from us." Jon nodded reluctantly. Morale was crucial in any military operation, and the news of their allies' abandonment would inevitably have an impact on the troops' confidence. We tell them the truth," he decided. "Lord Karstark has been called away to defend his own lands. But our cause remains just and our chances of success remain good." "You believe that?" Sansa asked quietly. Jon met her eyes, seeing the doubt there that he felt in his own heart. "I believe that we have no choice but to proceed. Whatever Lord Karstark's reasons, we can't let his decision determine our fate." The army that assembled in the pre-dawn darkness was smaller than originally planned, but it moved with the disciplined precision that had characterized all their operations. Jon rode at the head of the column, his mind focused on the tactical challenges ahead, while trying to ignore the nagging doubts about their allies' reliability. The march to the contact point took most of the morning, with scouts reporting regularly on enemy positions and movements. Saradam's forces were deployed exactly as their intelligence had indicated, but without the Karstark flanking force, the tactical situation was far more challenging. "They're in a strong defensive position," reported Ser Rodrik as he returned from his reconnaissance. "Good fields of fire, protected flanks, multiple withdrawal routes if they're pressed too hard." Numbers? Close to 3,000, as expected. Well-equipped, disciplined formations. They know we're coming. Jon nodded grimly. The element of surprise had been lost, probably when the Karstarks withdrew and word of the change in plans inevitably spread. Now they would be facing an alert enemy in prepared positions with reduced forces of their own. "We proceed as planned," he decided. "Hit them hard, inflict casualties, withdraw before they can bring their full strength to bear." The attack began with a coordinated assault on the Lannister left flank, designed to draw their attention and reserves, while the main Stark force prepared for the primary engagement. Jon watched from a ridge overlooking the battlefield as his men moved into position with the smooth efficiency of veteran soldiers. But something was wrong. The Lannister response was too quick, too well coordinated. They were reacting to Stark movements before those movements should have been visible, repositioning their forces with a precision that suggested advanced knowledge of the attack plan. "They knew," Robb said, his voice tight with realization. "They knew exactly what we were planning." Jon felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. The Karstark withdrawal hadn't been about wildling raids or protecting their own lands. It had been about betrayal, providing the Lannisters with detailed intelligence about Stark plans and capabilities. "Signal the withdrawal," he ordered. "All units, immediate disengagement." But it was too late. The Lannister forces were already moving to exploit their advantage, using their superior numbers and advanced knowledge to trap the Stark forces in an increasingly desperate situation. The fighting that followed was brutal and chaotic. Jon's men fought with the courage and skill that had made them formidable in previous engagements, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by an enemy who knew their every move. "We need to break contact," Ser Rodrik shouted over the clash of steel and the screams of wounded men. "If we stay here much longer, they'll surround us completely." Jon nodded, his mind racing through the tactical options. A fighting withdrawal under these circumstances would be costly, but it was their only hope of preserving the core of their force. "Sound the retreat," he ordered. "All units fall back to the secondary positions." The withdrawal was a nightmare of running battles and desperate rearguard actions. Jon's men fought magnificently, but the cost was terrible. By the time they reached the relative safety of the prepared fallback positions, they had lost nearly a third of their force, killed, wounded, or captured by the pursuing Lannisters. "Casualties?" Jon asked, as the surviving commanders gathered for assessment. 200 dead, at least that many wounded, reported Ser Rodrik, his weathered face grim with exhaustion and grief. "We lost most of our heavy cavalry, and a significant portion of our archers." It was a devastating blow, made worse by the knowledge that it had been unnecessary. With proper intelligence security and reliable allies, the engagement could have been avoided entirely or fought on much more favorable terms. "What of prisoners?" Robb asked. 50 men, including Ser Donalloch and several other knights. The Lannisters will use them for intelligence and possibly as bargaining chips. Jon felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Those men had trusted him, followed his orders, believed in his leadership. Now they were dead or captured because of his failure to anticipate betrayal from their supposed allies. "My lord," said one of the surviving scouts, "there's something else. We captured a Lannister messenger during the withdrawal. He was carrying dispatches that might be of interest." Bjorn took the leather satchel and examined its contents. The documents were routine military communications, but one detail caught his attention immediately. References to intelligence provided by our northern allies and coordination with Lord Cack. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning. Lord Karstark hadn't simply withdrawn his support. He had actively betrayed their plans to the enemy. "Why?" Arya asked, reading the implications in Jon's expression. "Why would he do this?" "I don't know," Jon replied honestly, "but we're going to find out." The march back to Winterfell was a somber affair, marked by the weight of defeat and the bitter knowledge of betrayal. Jon rode in silence, his mind working through the implications of what had happened and the choices that lay ahead. The Karstark betrayal had cost them dearly, but it had also revealed something important about the nature of their struggle. This wasn't simply a military conflict between great houses. It was a test of loyalty, honor, and the bonds that held the North together. "What do we do about Lord Karstark?" Robb asked as Winterfell came into view. "We deal with him," Jon replied, his voice carrying a hardness that his brother had rarely heard before. "Betrayal cannot go unpunished, especially betrayal that costs the lives of good men. And our overall strategy? We adapt, we learn from this defeat, and ensure it doesn't happen again. But we don't surrender, and we don't compromise with those who would destroy us." The words carried a determination that went beyond mere tactical considerations. The betrayal had wounded Jon deeply, not just as a military commander but as someone who had believed in the fundamental loyalty that bound the northern houses together. As they passed through the gates of Winterfell, Jon felt the eyes of his people upon him. They would be looking for signs of defeat or despair, hoping for reassurance that their cause was still viable despite the setback. "Gather the household," he told Maester Luwin. "I want everyone to hear what happened today, and what we intend to do about it." The great hall of Winterfell filled quickly with the assembled household, retainers, and surviving soldiers. Jon stood before them, still bearing the dust and blood of battle, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight with grim determination. "Today we suffered a defeat," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "We lost good men. Friends, brothers, fathers. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten, and their deaths will not go unavenged." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We were betrayed by those we trusted, abandoned by those we considered allies. But betrayal reveals character, both in those who commit it and in those who respond to it." "What will you do?" called out one of the soldiers, his voice carrying the pain of loss and the hunger for justice. "We will remember," Jon replied, his voice hardening. "We will remember who stood with us and who stood against us. We will remember the price of betrayal and ensure that it is paid in full." The words carried the weight of a vow, a promise that would shape the conflicts to come. The betrayal had changed something fundamental in Jon's approach to the war. It had shown him that honor and loyalty could not be assumed, that trust had to be earned and constantly verified. "House Stark endures," he continued, invoking the ancient words of their house. "We endure through winter and war, through betrayal and loss. We endure because we remember what matters most: family, honor, and the protection of those who depend on us." The assembled crowd responded with a roar of approval, their voices echoing through the ancient halls of Winterfell. Despite the defeat, despite the betrayal, their spirit remained unbroken. As the gathering dispersed, Jon remained in the great hall with his family, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. The betrayal had taught him hard lessons about the nature of power and loyalty, but it had also strengthened his resolve. "What now?" Catelyn asked. "Now we plan our response to Lord Karstark's treachery," Jon replied, "and we ensure that every other northern house understands the consequences of betrayal." The game had changed, and Jon Snow intended to play by the new rules. The boy who had left Casterly Rock months ago was gone, replaced by a man who understood that survival sometimes required choices that honor alone could not justify. The betrayal had wounded him, but it had also taught him, and in the conflicts to come, that education would prove invaluable. The war room at Winterfell had taken on a different atmosphere in the days following their defeat. Where once there had been confident planning and optimistic strategy sessions, now there was a harder edge to the discussions, a cold pragmatism born from bitter experience. Jon Snow stood before the great table, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight as he studied the maps that showed the disposition of northern houses. "Lord Karstark's betrayal cannot go unanswered," Jon said, his voice carrying a steel that hadn't been there before the battle. "If we allow treachery to succeed without consequence, we invite others to follow his example." The assembled commanders nodded grimly. The defeat had cost them dearly, not just in men and material, but in the confidence that their allies could be trusted. That trust, once broken, would be difficult to rebuild without decisive action. "What do you propose?" asked Robb, his blue eyes reflecting the same hardness that had settled over his brother. The betrayal had affected him deeply as well, challenging his fundamental beliefs about northern loyalty and honor. "We make an example," Jon replied simply. "We show every house in the north what happens to those who betray House Stark." "Carhold is well defended," observed Sir Roderick, his weathered face creased with concern. Lord Rickard has had time to prepare his defenses, and he knows we'll be coming. Which is why we won't attack Karhold directly, Jon said, moving to a different section of the map. At least, not initially. He pointed to several smaller holdings that bore the Karstark sigil, minor keeps and villages that provided resources and manpower to the main seat. We strike here first, cut off his supplies, isolate his supporters, force him to divide his attention between multiple threats. It was a strategy born from his education at Casterly Rock, the kind of systematic approach that Tywin Lannister would have employed. But there was something else in Jon's planning now, a personal edge that went beyond mere tactical considerations. That could take weeks, said Lady Mormont. Time we may not have, if the Lancers press their advantage. The Lannisters won't move immediately, Jon replied with confidence. Tywin is too careful for that. He'll consolidate his gains, reinforce his positions, wait to see how we respond to the defeat. That gives us a window of opportunity. And if you're wrong, asked Arya, her sharp mind cutting to the heart of the risk involved. Then we adapt, Jon said simply. But doing nothing is not an option. The other northern houses are watching to see how we respond to betrayal. If we appear weak or indecisive, we'll lose more allies than just the Karstarks. The discussion continued for another hour. With detailed planning of the campaign against House Karstark, it would be a different kind of warfare than they had practiced before. More personal, more brutal, designed not just to achieve military objectives, but to send a message that would resonate throughout the North.
How many men?
Asked Robb. 500, Jon replied. Enough to be effective. Not so many that we leave Winterfell vulnerable. We move fast, strike hard, and make it clear that betrayal has consequences. I should lead this force, Robb said immediately. As the heir to Winterfell. No, Jon interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority. This is my responsibility. Lord Karstark betrayed plans that I developed, cost the lives of men who trusted my leadership. The response must come from me personally. There was something in Jon's tone that brooked no argument, a hardness that reflected the changes the betrayal had wrought in him. Very well, Robb conceded, though his expression showed his reluctance. But you don't go alone. Take Ser Rodrik and enough experienced commanders to ensure success. Agreed, Jon said, but the final confrontation with Lord Karstark, that's mine. The preparations for the campaign took 2 days, with careful selection of troops and equipment. Jon chose his men based on loyalty and capability, veterans who had proven themselves in previous engagements, and whose dedication to House Stark was beyond question. As the force assembled in the courtyard of Winterfell, Jon felt the weight of what he was about to undertake. This would be different from their previous military operations, more personal, more brutal, with consequences that would echo throughout the North for years to come. Be careful, Catelyn said as she approached him near the stables. Her face showed the concern of a mother watching her son prepare for a dangerous mission, but also the understanding of a woman who recognized the necessity of what he was doing. I will be, Jon replied, though they both knew that the nature of his mission made such promises difficult to keep. And remember, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, that how you handle this will define how the other houses see you. Justice is necessary, but mercy can be just as powerful. Jon nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. The campaign against House Karstark would be watched closely by every northern house, and his actions would shape their perception of his leadership for years to come. The march to Karstark lands took 3 days, with the force moving swiftly through terrain that Jon knew well from his years in the north. The countryside showed signs of the approaching winter, bare trees, frost-covered fields, the kind of harsh beauty that characterized the lands beyond the Neck. Their first target was a minor keep called Last Hearth's Rest, a fortified manor that controlled one of the main supply routes to Karhold. It was defended by perhaps 50 men, mostly household guards and local militia, who had served House Karstark for generations. Surrender terms, asked Ser Rodrik, as they surveyed the target from a nearby ridge.
Standard, Jon replied. Lay down arms, swear new oaths to House Stark, and they'll be treated with honor. Resist, and they face the consequences of their lord's betrayal.
The assault began at dawn, with coordinated attacks on multiple points of the keep's defenses. Jon's men moved with the precision of veterans, their tactics refined by months of successful operations against Lannister forces. The defenders fought bravely, but were quickly overwhelmed by superior numbers and tactics. Within 2 hours, the keep had fallen, its garrison either dead or captured, its supplies and weapons seized for the Stark cause. Any word of surrender? Jon asked as he surveyed the captured stronghold. The captain of the guard requests terms, reported one of his sergeants. Says he's willing to swear new oaths if his men are spared. Granted, Jon decided, but make it clear that this mercy comes from House Stark's generosity, not from any obligation. Their lord's betrayal forfeited any claim to honorable treatment. It was a calculated gesture, designed to show that Jon could be both merciful and ruthless as circumstances required. The message would spread quickly through Karstark lands. Surrender and live, resist and face destruction. The pattern repeated itself over the next several days, as Jon's force systematically reduced the minor holdings that supported Karhold. Each victory was swift and decisive, each surrender accepted with terms that emphasized House Stark's power and Lord Karstark's betrayal. By the time they approached Karhold itself, Jon's reputation had preceded him. The smaller keeps had fallen so quickly and completely that word of his approach had spread throughout the region, carrying with it stories of his tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency. Kairhold's gates are closed, reported a scout as they crested the final ridge before the ancient seat of House Karstark. But there are signs of preparation, weapons being moved, defenses being strengthened. Jon studied the castle through his spyglass, noting the strong walls and defensive positions that had protected the Karstarks for centuries. It would be a difficult target under normal circumstances, but these were not normal circumstances. "Send a herald," he ordered. "I want to speak with Lord Karstark under a flag of truce." "Is that wise?" asked Scepter Roderick. "He's already proven his willingness to break faith." "He won't break a formal truce," Jon replied with confidence. "Whatever his other failings, Rickard Karstark still considers himself a man of honor. He'll meet with me." The herald returned within an hour, bearing Lord Karstark's agreement to a meeting at the midpoint between the castle and Jon's forces. The terms were formal and traditional. Each side could bring 5 men, weapons were permitted, but not to be drawn without provocation, and the parley would continue until one side formally ended it. Jon chose his companions carefully. Sir Roderick for his experience and wisdom, 2 sergeants whose loyalty was absolute, and Arya, whose presence would emphasize the personal nature of the betrayal. Lord Rickard Karstark approached the meeting point with his own escort, his weathered face showing the strain of recent events. He was a man in his 50s, with the gray hair and hard features that characterized the Northern Lords, but there was something different about him now, a defensive tension that hadn't been there during their previous meetings. "Jon Snow," he said as they faced each other across the neutral ground. "I wondered when you would come." "Did you?" Jon replied, his voice carefully neutral. "I would have thought that someone who betrayed his liege lord's plans to the enemy might have expected consequences." "I did what I believed was necessary for the survival of my house and my people," Lord Karstark replied, his voice carrying a defiance that didn't quite mask his uncertainty. "By providing our battle plans to the Lannisters. By ensuring that good men died because of your treachery. By preventing a war that the North cannot win," Karstark shot back. "You're leading us all to destruction, boy." Someone had to show sense. The words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of fundamental disagreement about duty, loyalty, and the nature of leadership. Jon felt a cold anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "So, you decided that betrayal was preferable to loyalty? That selling out your allies was better than standing with them?" "I decided that survival was more important than pride," Karstark replied. "The Lannisters offered generous terms that would have allowed the North to maintain its autonomy while acknowledging the Crown's authority." "And you believed them?" "I believed that they were preferable to the alternative, which is the complete destruction of every northern house that opposes them." Jon studied the older man's face, seeing the fear there beneath the defiance. Lord Karstark genuinely believed that he had made the right choice, that betrayal was justified by the circumstances they faced. "What terms did they offer you personally?" Jon asked quietly. The question hit its mark. Karstark's face flushed, and his eyes shifted away from Jon's steady gaze. "Confirmation of my holdings, protection for my family, a position of honor in the new order they intend to establish. And all it cost was the lives of 200 Stark soldiers. Those men died because you led them into a battle you couldn't win," Karstark replied, his voice rising with emotion. "If you had accepted the reality of our situation, The reality, John interrupted, his voice hardening, is that you betrayed your oaths, your honor, and your duty. The reality is that men died because of your treachery, and more will die because of your stubbornness. Karstark shot back. This war cannot be won, Jon Snow. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can all survive what's coming. Jon was quiet for a long moment, studying the man who had been one of his father's most trusted bannermen. There was genuine conviction in Karstark's words, a belief that his betrayal had been justified by circumstances, but there was also fear, and the kind of self-serving rationalization that allowed men to betray their principles while convincing themselves they were being noble. "You're wrong," Jon said finally. "This war can be won, but not by men who abandon their allies at the first sign of difficulty." "Then you're a fool," Karstark replied. "And you'll lead us all to destruction." "Perhaps," Jon acknowledged, "but I'd rather face destruction with honor than survival through betrayal." The philosophical disagreement had reached its natural conclusion. There would be no reconciliation, no meeting of minds between two men who held fundamentally different views about duty and survival. "I offer you one chance," Jon said formally. "Surrender Carholds, submit to House Stark's justice, and your family will be spared. Continue to resist, and face the consequences of your choices. And if I surrender, what justice would House Stark offer? Trial by combat, if you choose it, or formal judgment by the Lords of the North. Either way, your fate would be decided by law and custom, not by personal vengeance." Lord Karstark was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Jon's face to the forces arrayed behind him. The offer was more generous than he had any right to expect, given the nature of his betrayal. "And my family, my sons, would be judged on their own actions, not their father's crimes. If they played no part in the betrayal, they would face no punishment." It was a fair offer, more merciful than many lords would have provided under similar circumstances. But Jon could see in Karstark's eyes that it would not be accepted. "I cannot," the older man said finally. "I will not submit to the judgment of those I believe are leading the North to ruin." "Then you have chosen your path," Jon replied, "as I have chosen mine." The parley ended with formal courtesies that masked the deadly intent on both sides. As they returned to their respective forces, Jon felt the weight of what was about to happen. There would be no easy resolution, no negotiated settlement that preserved honor on both sides. "He won't surrender," Sir Roderick observed, as they rode back to their lines. "No," Jon agreed, "which means we take Carhold by force." The assault on Carhold began before dawn, with coordinated attacks on multiple points of the castle's defenses. Jon had studied the stronghold's weaknesses during his years in the north, and he exploited that knowledge ruthlessly. The fighting was fierce but brief. The Karstark garrison fought with the desperate courage of men defending their home, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by forces that had been hardened by months of successful warfare. Jon led the final assault, personally, his sword cutting through the defenders with the skill that years of training had provided. When the gates finally fell and his men poured into the courtyard, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Lord Karstark made his final stand in the great hall of his ancestral seat, surrounded by the last of his loyal men. When Jon entered the hall, sword in hand and armor stained with battle, the older man's defiance finally crumbled. "It's over," Jon said simply. "Yes," Karstark replied, his voice heavy with defeat. "It is." The final confrontation was brief and brutal. Lord Karstark chose to die with a sword in his hand rather than submit to capture, and Jon granted him that much honor. When it was finished, the betrayal had been answered, and the message had been sent. As Jon stood in the conquered hall of Carhold, surrounded by the evidence of his victory, he felt no satisfaction, only the grim certainty that this was what leadership required. The boy who had left Casterly Rock would never have been capable of such ruthless action. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who understood the true cost of power. The march back to Winterfell was a somber affair, marked by the weight of what had been accomplished, and the knowledge of what it meant for the future. Jon had proven his strength as a leader, but he had also crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When the gates of Winterfell came into view, Jon felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He had dealt with the betrayal, but the larger conflict remained, and the choices he had made would shape everything that followed. The retribution was complete, but the war was far from over. The Solar at Winterfell had become Ned Stark's refuge during his recovery, a place where he could conduct the business of lordship while his body slowly healed from the injuries sustained in King's Landing. The great chair by the window had been positioned to catch the afternoon light, and it was there that he spent most of his days, reading reports, receiving visitors, and contemplating the changes that had transformed his family and his realm. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced another visitor, and Ned looked up from the letter he had been reading. A detailed account of Jon's campaign against House Karstark, written in Maester Luwin's careful script. The door opened to admit Catelyn, carrying a tray with the midday meal that she insisted on bringing personally, despite his protests. "You're brooding again," she observed, setting the tray on the small table beside his chair. "I can always tell by the way you hold your shoulders." "I'm thinking," Ned corrected gently, though he knew she was right. The events of recent weeks had given him much to brood about, and the weight of those thoughts was difficult to bear. "About Jon's campaign?" Ned nodded, his gray eyes returning to the letter. "Maester Luwin's report is thorough. Jon's tactics were sound, his execution flawless, his results decisive. By any military standard, it was a complete success. But," Catelyn prompted, hearing the uncertainty in his voice, "if the boy had been raised by me, he would never have been capable of such ruthless efficiency. The systematic reduction of Karstark holdings, the calculated use of mercy and brutality, the final confrontation with Lord Rickard, it's the work of a man who has learned hard lessons about the nature of power." Catelyn settled into the chair across from him, her expression thoughtful. "You sound as if you disapprove." "I don't know what I feel," Ned admitted. "I'm proud of his success, grateful for his loyalty, impressed by his capabilities. But I'm also concerned about what this transformation means for him, and for our family." "He did what was necessary," Catelyn said firmly. "Lord Karstark's betrayal cost us dearly, and it could have cost us everything if it had gone unanswered. Jon understood that, and acted accordingly." "Yes," Ned agreed. It was a painful acknowledgement, but an honest one. The reports from the campaign painted a picture of calculated violence and strategic thinking that would have been foreign to the boy Ned remembered. Jon had become an effective military commander, but the price of that effectiveness was troubling. "War changes people," Catelyn observed. "Your father understood that, as did his father before him. The North has always produced men who could be gentle in peace, and terrible in war." "True," Ned conceded. "But Jon's education at Casterly Rock has given him capabilities that go beyond traditional northern warfare. He thinks like Tywin Lannister now, systematically, ruthlessly, with a clear understanding of how power works and how it must be applied." "Is that necessarily a bad thing?" Ned was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. In purely practical terms, Jon's transformation was beneficial. They needed a commander who could match the Lannisters' sophistication and ruthlessness. But the personal cost was troubling. "I suppose that depends on whether he can retain his essential nature while exercising those capabilities," Ned said finally. "Power corrupts, Cat. I've seen it happen to good men who started with the best of intentions. And you're worried that Jon might follow that path?" "I'm worried that the choices he's making now will change him in ways that can't be undone." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Robb entered at Ned's invitation, his face showing the strain of recent events, but also a determination that reminded Ned of his own younger self. "Father," Robb said, settling into a third chair, "I wanted to discuss the military situation with you." "Of course. What's your assessment?" "Jon's campaign against the Karstarks has been completely successful," Robb began. "The message has been received throughout the North: betrayal of House Stark will not be tolerated, but it's also created new challenges. Such as, the other northern houses are reassessing their positions. Some are more committed to our cause than ever, impressed by Jon's decisive action. Others are concerned about the implications of such ruthless punishment for political disagreement." It was exactly the kind of complex political consequence that Ned had feared. Military success often created as many problems as it solved, particularly when that success was achieved through methods that challenged traditional expectations. "And the Lannisters? Tywin has been consolidating his forces, but he hasn't moved to exploit our temporary weakness. Our intelligence suggests he's waiting to see how the northern houses respond to recent events before committing to a major offensive." "Which gives us time to prepare," Ned observed. "Yes, but it also raises questions about our command structure going forward. The defeat at the hands of the Lannisters, followed by Jon's successful campaign against the Karstarks, has created a situation where our military leadership needs to be clarified. Ned studied his eldest son's face, seeing the reluctance there, but also the honesty that had always characterized Robb's approach to difficult subjects. "You're suggesting that Jon should assume overall command of our military forces," Ned said. "I am," Robb confirmed. "The men respect him, the other commanders trust his judgment, and he's proven his capability in both victory and defeat. More importantly, he understands our enemies in ways that the rest of us don't." It was a painful admission for Robb to make, acknowledging that his brother was better suited for military command than the legitimate heir to Winterfell. But it was also a sign of maturity and wisdom that made Ned proud. "And you would be comfortable serving under his command?" Catelyn asked. "I would be honored to serve under his command," Robb replied firmly. "Jon has proven himself to be everything that a military commander should be: intelligent, decisive, capable of inspiring loyalty while making the hard choices that victory requires." Ned leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications of what Robb was suggesting. From a purely practical standpoint, it made perfect sense. Jon had demonstrated superior tactical and strategic capabilities, and his recent success had enhanced his reputation throughout the North. But there were also political considerations to weigh. Making a bastard the overall military commander of House Stark would send a message throughout the Seven Kingdoms, one that could have far-reaching consequences for their family's future. "The other lords might object," Ned said carefully. "Placing a bastard in command over legitimate heirs and established nobles could be seen as unconventional." "The other lords have seen what Jon can accomplish," Robb replied. "They've also seen what happens when conventional approaches fail. I think most of them would prefer effective leadership to traditional precedents. And those who don't will have to decide whether their pride is more important than their survival," Robb said bluntly. "We're fighting for the existence of House Stark and the independence of the North. This isn't the time for political niceties." The conversation continued for another hour, with detailed discussion of the practical implications of such a command change. By the time Robb departed, Ned had a clear understanding of the situation and the choices that lay before him. "What do you think?" he asked Catelyn. They were alone again. "I think Robb is right," she replied without hesitation. "Jon has proven himself to be our most capable military commander, and the current situation requires the best leadership we can provide. Even though it means elevating a bastard over legitimate heirs, even though it means acknowledging reality over convention," Catelyn corrected. "Jon may be a bastard by what we told others, but he's proven himself to be a true son of House Stark in every way that matters." It was a remarkable statement from a woman who had once viewed Jon's presence at Winterfell as a constant reminder of her husband's infidelity. But the events of recent months had changed many things, including Catelyn's perception of the boy she had once resented. That evening, Ned summoned Jon to the Solar for a private conversation. His son arrived promptly, still bearing the dust of travel from his return from Carahold. There was something different about him now, a hardness around the eyes, a set to his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried and difficult choices made. "Sit," Ned said, gesturing to the chair that Robb had occupied earlier. "We need to talk." Jon settled into the chair with the controlled grace of a man who had learned to be constantly alert. "About the Karstark campaign." "About your future," Ned replied, "and the future of House Stark's military efforts." He studied his son's face, seeing the intelligence there that had become characteristic of Jon's demeanor. "Robb has suggested that you should assume overall command of our forces," Ned continued. "He believes, and I agree, that you have demonstrated superior capabilities in both tactical and strategic planning." Jon was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight as he considered the implications of what was being offered. "That would be unprecedented," he said finally. "Yes, it would. A bastard commanding the military forces of a great house is not something that has much precedent in the Seven Kingdoms. But these are not conventional times, and conventional solutions have not proven adequate to our challenges." "What about Robb? He's the heir to Winterfell, the natural choice for military command." "Robb is an excellent soldier and a capable leader," Ned replied, "but he lacks your strategic insight and your understanding of our enemies. More importantly, he recognizes that fact and is willing to serve under your command for the good of House Stark." The offer hung in the air between them, carrying with it implications that went far beyond mere military command. It was an acknowledgement of Jon's capabilities, but also a burden that would shape the rest of his life. "I'm honored by the trust you're placing in me," Jon said carefully, "but I want to be certain that this is what's best for House Stark, not just what's convenient in the current crisis." "What do you mean?" "I mean that giving a bastard overall military command will have political consequences that extend beyond this conflict. Other houses will see it as a sign of weakness or desperation, and it could affect our relationships throughout the Seven Kingdoms." It was a sophisticated analysis, showing that Jon understood the broader implications of the decision, but it also revealed his continued concern for his family's welfare over his own advancement. "Those are valid concerns," Ned acknowledged, "but they're outweighed by the immediate necessity of effective leadership. We're fighting for our survival, Jon. Everything else is secondary to that goal. And if I fail, if my command leads to defeat and the destruction of House Stark, then we'll face that failure together as a family, but I don't believe you'll fail. You've proven yourself capable of learning from defeat, adapting to changing circumstances, and making the hard choices that leadership requires." Jon was quiet again, his mind clearly working through the decision and its implications. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of acceptance. "If you believe this is what House Stark needs, then I accept the responsibility. But I want it understood that this is a military appointment, not a political one. When this conflict is over, command should return to its traditional structure." "Agreed," Ned said, though he suspected that the distinction might prove less clear-cut than Jon hoped. "But for now, you are the military commander of House Stark's forces, with all the authority and responsibility that position entails." The formal appointment was announced the following morning, with the household and remaining military commanders assembled in the Great Hall of Winterfell. Ned's words were carefully chosen, emphasizing Jon's proven capabilities while acknowledging the unconventional nature of the decision. "The challenges we face require the best leadership we can provide," Ned concluded. "Jon Snow has demonstrated that leadership through his actions, and I have complete confidence in his ability to guide our military efforts to victory." The response was largely positive, with most of the assembled commanders expressing their support for the decision. There were some murmurs of concern about precedent and tradition, but these were outweighed by recognition of Jon's proven capabilities. After the formal ceremony, Jon found himself in the war room with the maps and plans that would now be his primary responsibility. The weight of command settled on his shoulders like a physical burden, but it was accompanied by a sense of purpose that he had been seeking since his return to Winterfell. "Overwhelming," asked Arya, who had been observing from the corner of the room. "Daunting," Jon corrected. "But also, right somehow. This is what I was trained for, what all those years at Casterly Rock were preparing me to do. And now you get to use that training against the man who provided it." "Yes," Jon agreed, his voice carrying a mixture of regret and determination. "The irony is not lost on me." He turned to the great map that dominated the eastern wall, his mind already working through the strategic challenges that lay ahead. The appointment to overall command had given him the authority he needed to implement his vision for the conflict, but it had also made him responsible for the lives and futures of everyone who served House Stark. "What's the plan?" Arya asked. "We adapt as always," Jon replied. "And if that's not enough?" Jon was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes reflecting the weight of the responsibility he had accepted. "Then we make sure that House Stark's final stand is worthy of our name and our history. But I don't intend for it to come to that." The words carried the confidence of a man who had learned hard lessons about leadership and was prepared to apply that knowledge in service of his family. As the afternoon light faded into evening, Jon remained in the war room, studying maps and planning the campaigns that would determine the fate of House Stark. The weight of command was heavy, but it was a burden he was prepared to bear. 300 AC, Winterfell. The war room. The morning sun cast long shadows across the war room as Jon Snow stood before the great map, studying reports from across the narrow sea. Intelligence about Daenerys Targaryen's recent conquest of Mirian lay scattered across the oak table, fragments gathered from merchants and sailors who had witnessed the Dragon Queen's rise in Slaver's Bay. "The timing couldn't be better," Jon murmured, examining a detailed account from a Taroshi merchant. According to the report, Daenerys had taken the Great Pyramid and was consolidating her power rather than moving toward Westeros immediately. Robb entered with Maester Luwin, both bearing the strain of recent weeks. The Karstark betrayal had shaken them all, and daily reports brought news of more northern houses thinking of bending the knee to Joffrey. The morning reports, Maester Luwin said, setting down correspondence. The Lannisters continue consolidating their position. More houses declare for them daily. What of our remaining allies? Robb asked. Lord Manderley holds White Harbor under pressure. The mountain clans remain loyal, but limited in numbers. House Mormont supports us from Bear Island, though they offer little beyond moral support. Jon listened with half his attention, his mind focused on the Essos reports. The Dragon Queen represented unprecedented potential, an ally with power to change the entire war's balance. There is another matter, Jon said, turning from the map. I've been considering our strategic options. It's time we looked beyond Westeros for allies. Beyond Westeros, Robb frowned. Daenerys Targaryen, as I suggested before. Silence followed. Maester Luwin paled while Robb's expression shifted to alarm. But Jon, she's a Targaryen. Our fathers fought to overthrow her dynasty. Our fathers fought the Mad King, Jon corrected with authority, learned at Casterly Rock. Aerys was a tyrant, but his daughter, the reports suggest, different cloth entirely. Jon gathered intelligence reports from his desk. She's conquered 3 cities in Slaver's Bay, freeing hundreds of thousands. She commands unsullied loyalty, the finest soldiers known, and she has dragons. Robb, 3 of them, growing stronger daily. Dragons that could burn Winterfell as easily as King's Landing, Maester Luwin pointed out. Dragons that could end this war in our favor, Jon countered. What's our greatest disadvantage? Numbers, gold, crown support. Daenerys Targaryen could neutralize all those advantages. What exactly are you proposing? Robb asked carefully. Alliance. We offer her something needed, a Westeros foothold, legitimate cause beyond conquest, and she provides military support to defeat the Lannisters. Jon spread out Westeros maps. Look strategically. We control the largest kingdom, with natural invasion barriers. Landing here gives her secure operations base and time to build support. The kingdoms that overthrew her family, Maester Luwin reminded. Kingdoms suffering under Lannister rule, Jon replied. How many lords would prefer Targaryen, restoration, to continued Lannister dominance? The sophisticated analysis showed Jon's thorough absorption of Casterly Rock's statecraft lessons, thinking beyond immediate military advantage to long-term political strategy. Arya entered with casual confidence, studying documents spread across the table. You're planning something, she observed. Jon proposes alliance with Daenerys Targaryen again, Robb explained neutrally. The Dragon Queen? Ambitious? Arya showed no shock. Dragons would end the war? Dragons would change everything, Jon replied. The question is convincing Daenerys our cause aligns with her interests. Debate continued for hours, with practical concerns about communication, political implications, and alliance terms. Gradually, Jon won them over. How would we contact her? Robb asked, finally. Lord Manderley. He has merchant contacts trading across the Narrow Sea. If anyone can reach Daenerys Targaryen, among us, it's him. After extensive discussion, they reached consensus to attempt contact. Jon settled at his desk to draft the crucial letter. Every word needed careful weighing, respectful, but not supplicating, offering partnership rather than begging aid. To her grace, Daenerys of House Targaryen, rightful queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, Meereen, and the First Men. I write from Winterfell, hoping common cause might unite us in struggle for justice and rightful rule restoration to the 7 kingdoms. The realm suffers under Lannister tyranny, usurpers who seized power through treachery. Their rule built on lies, maintained through fear, sustained by stolen crown gold. House Stark fights not from ambition but necessity, protecting our people, preserving ancient laws, ensuring justice for crimes against family and realm. Our causes align perfectly. You seek rightful throne reclamation from illegitimate usurpers. We seek realm freedom from perverted justice. You built strength liberating Essos oppressed. We fight protecting Westeros innocent. The North offers partnership, largest kingdom support for your rightful claim, exchanging northern autonomy recognition under Targaryen rule. Such alliance provides secure Westeros foothold for Iron Throne reclamation. The North commands house loyalty, controls resource-rich territories, maintains warfare-seasoned armies. Our cause enjoys common people support suffering under Lancer rule. House Stark pledges loyalty to your claim, serving as primary conquest allies. The North provides soldiers, supplies, invaluable strategic Westeros knowledge. I understand such alliance requires unprecedented trust. Perhaps meeting arrangements, ensuring all parties' safety. I'm willing providing hostages or guarantees proving sincere commitment. The realm cries for justice, your grace. Together, we might restore peace and prosperity to Westeros. Written by Jon Snow, commander of Northern forces, with Lord Eddard Stark's full authority. Jon sealed the letter with black wax and the Stark direwolf. Lord Manderley arrived 2 days later, listening carefully to Jon's explanation without surprise. Getting message to the Dragon Queen, he mused. Not impossible, but difficult and slow. What's required? Jon asked. Narrow sea passage. I know captains trading with free cities, some with Slaver's Bay connections. Finding trustworthy message carriers is the challenge. Could one of your loyal men do it personally? Some could secret trading deals have taught me dangerous water navigation. I have Pentos and Tyros contacts who might arrange marine passage. You're willing to take those risks? He smiled. I've spent life taking risks for believed causes. This is the most worthy I've served. Preparations took several days, with careful cover story attention. One of Manderley's loyal follower would travel as a merchant seeking free cities opportunities, the letter hidden among commercial documents. On departure morning, Jon stood on Winterfell's battlements, watching the party disappear into distance. The fate-determining letter was beyond his control. Now, think she'll respond favorably? Arya asked, joining him. She'll consider it carefully, Jon replied. She'll recognize the opportunity. And if she doesn't, then we continue fighting with current allies, Jon said, and hope courage and determination suffice. Weeks passed slowly, with grim reports painting increasingly desperate strategic positions. House Frey declared for the crown, closing twins' access. Minor northern houses followed Stark example, accepting royal pardons. We're being slowly strangled, Robb observed during strategy meetings. Which makes Daenerys' alliance more crucial daily, Jon replied. 2 months later, everything changed. Maester Luwin burst into the war room, holding a letter sealed with black wax. A ship reached White Harbor before it fell. The captain carried this, with Winterfell delivery instructions. Jon recognized the three-headed dragon seal. With trembling hands, he broke it open. Jon Snow of House Stark. Your letter reached me in Meereen. I've considered your proposal carefully and find merit in your arguments. Your proposed alliance intrigues me. House Stark's honor is known. Your cause appears just. Lannister removal would serve all Westeros interests. However, such alliance requires more than letters. If serious, we must meet personally to discuss terms and assess character. I propose neutral ground meeting, perhaps Pentos, where neither holds advantage. I'm prepared traveling there with small retinue, if you're willing. Trust and mutual respect must build successful alliance. Face-to-face meeting would establish both. I await your response. Daenerys of House Targaryen. Jon read it thrice before implications sank in. She'd agreed to consider alliance, willing to meet personally, more than he'd dared hope. She wants to meet in Pentos, Robb said, reading over Jon's shoulder. Logical next step, Jon replied, mind working through challenges. Letters accomplish limited amounts. Real alliance requires face-to-face forging. Despite risks, they decided Jon would travel to Pentos with small retinue, Ser Odric for military counsel, Maester Luwin for diplomacy, trusted guards. Second thoughts? Arya asked the night before departure. Many, Jon admitted, but not enough to change my mind. What if she's not what you expect? Then I'll adapt. Tywin taught me successful negotiations require flexibility and quick opponent reading. The next morning, Jon's party assembled in the courtyard. As they rode through Winterfell's gates, Jon felt anticipation and anxiety mixture. Be safe, Robb called. I'll bring back an ally, Jon replied. Dragons are bonus. Behind lay everything known and loved. Ahead lay unknown, meeting with a dragon-commanding queen who could reshape the world. The game had expanded beyond Westeros borders, and Jon Snow was making his life's most important move.